have with me a man who needs no introduction, I think, but I will introduce him nonetheless. He is the National Theatre's director, an award-winning director in charge of the National Theatre and everything we see here, and of course this production of Macbeth is his very own. Can you just start by telling me what made you sort of think about taking a stab at Macbeth?
I think most directors probably have a bottom drawer full of plays that at some point they'd like to try and have a go at, and Macbeth was definitely one of those for me. I remember seeing it when I was 16, I think, for the first time, and I think I studied it in school like most people. It's just one of those incredible masterpieces that doesn't ever quite leave you. I mean, I had no idea when I was going to do it, and it took a long time coming about.
So why now? Why now in 2018?
Macbeth, as I'm sure all of you know, was not Shakespeare's idea. It was in the Holinshed Chronicles, like many of his plays, started their kind of, well, that was where he discovered those stories, and the Holinshed, and consequently Shakespeare, set it really in 11th century or thereabouts Scotland, which was a period where, as I'm sure many people here know, the whole of the east side of this island was, not just the east side, but mostly was suffering from incursions all the time from the Danes, Norwegians, Vikings, and it would have been a period of some chaos and some disruption, civil war, where locals would take sides and shift sides about, as the play describes. It had nothing to do with 17th century England, but was at a time of civil war, also at a time where Christianity hadn't really properly embedded in our culture. So paganism or superstition or our spiritual belief system, whatever you want to call it, would have been more prevalent than it has been any time since. So I wanted to try and find a way of making that prescient now, and you don't have to look very far before you look at Syria, or a few years ago the Balkans, large parts of Africa, where long civil wars have created a kind of climate of disruption, anarchy to a degree, and kind of feudal chaos to an extent. I think is what Shakespeare was writing about, and so I suppose it was a combination of factors, but it felt prescient now. That doesn't feel very far away, that chaos.
And we were talking backstage about your sort of international background, how much you've traveled, how much you've lived abroad, and you brought that to bear very much in this production. For those of you who've seen it, you'll know it's about a sort of it's got a devastating dystopian backdrop or landscape. What was the inspiration behind that for you, Rufus?
Well, I think in a way, like you say, some of these images that inform the work that you make might have occurred 20 years ago, but they stay with you. On my travels, I've been fortunate enough to have been to a lot of places, sometimes in conflict zones and sometimes where ideas like being on a national grid or refuse collection are not part of the landscape. So you get a sense of what, if a civil war broke out here now, and the national grid went down and the internet went down tonight, and refuse collection stopped tomorrow, in a few years, ammunition would run out. I think we'd probably be in a pretty horrific state of chaos fairly quickly if there was no order. And this landscape that we're in now, or in the east coast of Scotland, would, I think, very quickly start to resemble some of those places. When I've been to, or even more recently, going to the jungle in Calais, actually, where you see, refugee camps that are put together. The one thing that is, all traveling around sort of poorer areas of Africa or in India or parts of the Middle East, the plastic is that's what's there. That's what will be there in 1,000 years.
And you wanted to introduce that idea into Macbeth.
Well, it just felt like, if that is part of what the landscape would be. It was trying to really look to what this world of ours would be like in a time of chaos in a few years, if that were to descend. And it's not hard to imagine because it's true. It's already true in many parts of the world.
And in terms of young people and getting them to engage with Macbeth, what are the messages do you think that young people can take away from Macbeth that they too can perhaps relate to personally?
Yeah, I mean, I think Macbeth and Lady Macbeth have, it's a real bond of love, and what's really fascinating, and I think, dare I say it, something that Rory and Anne-Marie really capture beautifully, is what happens when pressure is brought to bear on a relationship, albeit self-inflicted in this case, and how that starts to fracture, how her conscience starts to eat her at the same time as his drive to survive and keep moving forward into that drives them apart. At the end of, there's a key moment. I mean, there are always choices. Shakespeare offers you up choices all the way through, but there's a key moment in Act 3, Scene 1, when he dismisses her. I mean, you could read it that he's just dismissing his court. We're a bit more pointed with it because he's then going to go off and meet the murderers and get them going. And it's when he starts to not include her in his plans. And shortly after that, he says, "Be ignorant of the knowledge till thou applauds the deed." And that's a moment where you just see them starting to separate. And she's suddenly going, "Where's my partner? Where's my partner in everything?" And it starts to come apart there. So I guess one of the messages is the nature of union is trust and communication. When he stops
and the
communicating,
darkness that you can have in relationships, in your most intimate relationship too. Both Anne-Marie and Rory were saying earlier this afternoon to me that your vision of this production really dictated what they brought to the performance. That actually they needed to know what they would be doing, what the context was, what the landscape was, what the backdrop was, in order to know how they'd play their parts.
I think every director works in a completely different way, and in a sense, it's quite a lonely job because you don't really, when you finish doing your assisting, which most of us do at the beginning of our careers, you never get in a rehearsal room with another director. So I don't know how other directors work really. The world of the play was cooked up mostly with Ray Smith, the designer. But then conversations go on all the way through it, and all kinds of details emerge and developments emerge in rehearsrsal. I'm very collaborative, and when you're, I feel very strongly if you're going to be surround yourself in a room with a bunch of bright people, then why pretend that you're the brightest? I think that the job really is to try and pool the ideas that come through. The context certainly was set before we started. It was always going to be now after a civil war, or in a few years' time after a civil war. And that was obviously something that I talked about with both of them before we started. They don't walk in on day one and go, "Oh, where's my doublet?"
Sounds like I watched Rory and Anne-Marie today, and I thought how close they were. And it sounds like you create a really close, intimate set. And I wondered also about how you all deal, and particularly with you at the helm, deal with reviews that, in this case, have been quite mixed.
That's kind.
There was no easy way to say this.
Yeah, no, we largely got hammered. Which is tough. That's it's happened to me before. It will happen to me again. Anyone who's been in this game for any length of time, you do have to take the rough with the smooth. Sometimes when that happens, you go, actually, quietly, I know it isn't very good. And they have got a point. And sometimes you completely disagree with them. And in a way, that's tougher because I don't really believe in any right of reply. Critics do their job. They're a pretty informed bunch. They see a lot of theatre. And I think, after thinking about it for a long time, you sort of conclude that in this case, they didn't like it. So that's, that can be quite bumpy. And on a personal level, of course, it's bumpy because this, this was my idea to do the show this way. And I completely take responsibility for it. And of course, I'm held accountable for it. But I also totally stand by it. And I think there are certain things that critics don't want to see. And I don't necessarily agree that one shouldn't see it.
And if you looked on Twitter, which I did, lots of people were writing to say how much they loved it. And I wondered, you talk about taking responsibility and accountability. This job must be full of highs and lows for you, and you've been in it now for the last 3 years. How do you manage that?
I've got a great partner, which is really key, and 2 great kids who don't take any shit from me. I think it's really good if you are emotionally robust, and I am very. You don't step into a job like this and expect it to go smoothly, and it's. I had a great chat with Michael Boyd after I got the job, before I'd taken over. And I hope he won't mind me taking his name in vain, but he said, when I took over the RSC, I could have farted and everybody would have said it was great. You're not in that position. So you also come into a time where you go, actually, what I inherited was an organisation that was full of great people. We just completed NT Future, which is fantastic. Nick and Nick, certainly run one of the most successful periods in this theatre's history. So there's going to be some bumps with that as you go along. But it's above it, it's such a privilege. It's really fantastic to rather than sit at the back and gripe about what I think theatre should be about, or what I think a national theatre should represent, or we should be touring more, we should be more diverse, we should be this, we should be that, and you got a chance to do it.
What are you most excited about in the year ahead?
The thing that I'm most excited about are the things that help this organisation grow, that make us more national. We've significantly increased our touring over the last couple of years. I think 2/3 of our public performances in the last 12 months were not here on the South Bank, and in this day and age, particularly with the protest vote that came a couple of years ago, I think it's really, really important that we take the national part of our name incredibly seriously. So I'm excited by and invigorated by the opportunity and the challenge to keep pushing that out.
Thank you very much for your candour and your openness. It really was a real eye-opener. Thank you.
Thank you.